Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for October 6th, 2023. I'm Benji Fisher moderating, and also here are Ralph Kohler, who's sharing his screen, and we'll start the discussion. Aaron McHale, Emma Harrell, and Simo Helston. So go ahead, Ralph.
It's just a brief one revisiting the issue from last week's or the week before, not sure anymore. It's about allow to JS filter blocks and regions on the block layout administration page. It's issue number 3273173, and the person who was or is actively working on the issue already implemented most of the suggestions, but he surfaced one detail we haven't really minded when we were discussing the issue, and I just demonstrated. I've applied the patch, the recent one. For example, I intentionally look for the Powered by Drupal patch, and as you can see, it got filtered, but it's way beneath the fold and just at the bottom. And that's the point. He added basically some go-to links, go to the items found, which scrolls, and then added as well on every filtered options, one filtered change. Once the count, we suggested that in that block region something got filtered out, but as well as a link back to the filter. Point is, there are two aspects. First, there isn't really, and on the other hand, the clear filter button was also added. There's more detail in the comments, but in general, it's about the pattern of scrolling, something I was unable to find anywhere in Drupal. And point is, it's definitely a good thing to not to just focus. As far as I remember, we recommended directly, but otherwise make it basically an intentional step. For people with vestibular disorder in particular, it could be problematic if they are unprepared. And also, it's also Mike Gifford asked a friend of him to test who has vestibular disorder, and he confirmed that scrolling is a triggering event. So with on the device reduced motion is active, then it should be just jumping instead of scrolling. But my question is, for me, it looks like that change filter is sort of redundant on every block region. If it would make sense to have one single, basically back to top button in the lower right corner or in the center or wherever, and to provide some sort of unified pattern that could be used anywhere else in Drupal as well, maybe. But in the current state of the patch, I'm not sure if it's a good thing at the moment. And therefore, I thought it would be a good idea to briefly revisit and to get a few more opinions about that.
Okay, I have a few comments. I'll give other people a chance first, but could you say again what disability has problems with scrolling?
I don't know what was pronounced correctly. Vestibular disorder.
Vestibular?
Vestibular. I can post a
chat.
link into the chat with the different kinds of vestibular disorders.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else have comments, suggestions, questions? If you
Can I just check? So at the moment, those jump to links take you down the page, but there's no way to get back up apart from scrolling, is what you were saying, Ralph.
No, even the back down to the first match basically is also not in place, or the filter in general is not in place. That is added in the patch, but yeah, it is the developer added the go to the bottom
Yeah.
link, as well as added to every block region that change filter link you can see here, and here. And if you click that, you get back up.
Okay. I think, like you saying, back to top makes more sense as a sort of anti-pattern, because that means you have to just try it out, don't you? You have to press it and then press it again to work out that it's taking you back up the way. So my thought would be a back to top button could be a better option. But that's not really based on any. That's based on patterns that I've seen rather than any heuristic good practice.
That's actually good to have it next to the information about filtered out content, so that there is something that the action where you can go to show those. So it's not the best possible thing, but it's something that you can. There is an action you can take right next to those. That now that you see that something is filtered out, so you can do something right away from that location to start. So, and if it's back to top, then it's kind of where is the top? Is it the block layout? So it's the filter is not the top in a way. So it's, I think visually it's a little bit confusing, but I think when if a user focuses on to filtered, and then you have right there the change filter, that's kind of something you can act on.
Okay, I have a few opinions here. First of all, I don't think that having the item below the fold is such a big problem that it's worth the complexity of adding a link to scroll to it. I don't think any theme is going to have so many regions that scrolling past the empty regions is a serious problem. Second minor point, I think filtered is not the best choice of word. I would say either filtered out or hidden, and I'd probably go for hidden. And third, rather than have a link to go back to the top of the page and repeat that link every time, I would rather make the filter sticky. So Ralph, could you open maybe in another tab the content page?
1 second. Yeah.
Oh.
I don't have.
So maybe in a few minutes I'll be screen sharing and I can demonstrate, because I've installed the Umami demo site, so I have some content to show. But if you do have content to show and you select one or more nodes, then you get a floating or you get a fixed little form at the bottom for applying actions. And I guess that's totally hidden at this point since you don't have any content.
The bulk actions.
So there is another frequently used admin page in Drupal that uses that pattern, and I think it would make sense to do something similar here, but maybe make it fixed at the top of the screen rather than the bottom of the screen. And then, I don't know, maybe this is a design question rather than a usability question, or maybe other people have different opinions, but rather than put the message of how many filtered or hidden items there are, rather than putting that on a separate line, I think there's plenty of room to put it on the same line as the region name and the place block button.
1 second. That is because that's one of the problems I've mentioned in the comments. Basically, you have for block regions that have no matches, you have a consistent height, but block regions with filtered out changes, with filtered out blocks have a different height, and that way it's got unsteady. And one suggestion I made in here is the following. Oops, it's just chopped together with new tab with DevTools, basically to apply something like that. That the actions are in the block region row, and the information, what is filtered, or if there are no block regions, are underneath. And that way, the height would be consistent, and it's also a separation of concerns that way.
Yeah, I think the consistency is an improvement. On the other hand, it makes the scrolling problem worse since you're taking up more vertical space. Yeah. And I wonder if you know, the opposite approach might work, combining with my previous suggestion of putting the message on the same line as the region name, and then hiding the no blocks message, and instead having the 0 hidden items message. I don't feel strongly about any of those. They're just suggestions. And I see that Thomas Howell has also joined us. And Thomas, I think you probably remember we talked about this issue 1 or 2 weeks ago about filtering blocks on the block layout page.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the suggestions that I do feel strongly about are, rather than having a link to go back to the top of the page, which people generally have a key on their keyboard, right? The home page will generally scroll to the top of the page anyway. Rather than have that, I'd rather make the filter stay on the screen.
So when I'm sorry, I should have raised my hand. Is it right if I comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking based on what I've heard. So in the problem of scrolling, would it be possible within the filter to, again, I think this is not necessarily the right choice, but regardless of whether we follow Ralph's recommendation or this recommendation that's on the showing right now, being able to jump somewhere in the list, like go like sort of like a jump by 10 from the filter. So if the filter stays at the top of the page and you have an ability to jump down, it would reduce the load when it comes to interacting with long lists. Is that a type of thing that, because there's the potential for a solution, it can help us determine which of these solutions works for us, and then make a follow-up issue to potentially address scrolling? Because If scrolling is going to be a problem no matter what, then it sounds like that's something that we need to just recommend gets fixed, and then make the best decision, assuming that in the future we can solve that problem, rather than making compromises in how we handle these particular issues.
So you're suggesting that we put off the question of scrolling to a follow-up issue?
Correct. Like let's figure out how we, in the assumed world, we work against what we believe will be the best interface here, either how Ralph represented it, how it is here, but making those decisions and not worrying about scrolling as an issue, but marking it as an issue, and that is a follow-up issue to be addressed. Correct. And we can put suggestions about how someone might handle that. We can think about it, but let's move as much of that cognitive load from this discussion into the future so that we make certain the way this works for small sites as well as large, because I'd hate to make a decision worrying about a large site when there are many sites that don't have many regions, and making them handicap, or I should not use that, making them
Accessible?
yes, making them accessible in a way that works in all contexts is very important. So that, because we're not going to change the number of rows no matter how much we squeeze it down. Like how we arrange that doesn't change the fact that you still have to scroll through these things. So being able to navigate scrolling long lists of regions is a separate problem than how each region is handled. And that's why I would recommend separating them.
I certainly think these refinements could be put off to a follow-up issue, and but I would like to leave that decision to the people working on the issue. Any other points on this issue? Questions, comments, suggestions? I think I'm the most opinionated one on this issue. What do you think of my suggestion that that we don't need the go to item link? Yeah, again, it's only useful if you've filtered out almost everything, as in this example, you filtered it down to one item. And in that case, you only have to scroll for as many rows as you have regions. So I don't think it's worth the complexity of a link. What do you think of that point of view? Go ahead.
I think I agree, but I also agree with Thomas. So it might be a good choice to move the whole scrolling part to follow-up issue, and when that issue itself is committed, see what the feedback is and see it in real world complex as well as simple sites, less complex sites, and that way then make an informed decision. Otherwise, it's more or less assumption, and it's too challenging to make sure every context is provided a good user experience in that regard. So I would vote for a follow-up issue about the whole scrolling topic.
Emma in the chat basically agrees with me. It would simplify things not to have the jump to functionality. Go ahead, Thomas.
I also agree that I would get rid of the go to items found. I worry that it's not a standard pattern for a lot of people. the language, like then you're really stuck trying to figure out how to make that language right. And I think how Ralph very succinctly described what I was trying to say, this all fits together. So I agree with you, Benji. I think that should go away, and we can move that into this. That would be one possible fix, though I really not fond of it. But it's all part of how to move through the page, which is different than the issue of filtering it. So yes, I would get rid of it, but I think having a follow-up issue is how we can comfortably get rid of this, because we don't have enough information, as Ralph said.
Okay, so I think we have consensus there for now. Get rid of it. Consider doing it in a follow-up issue.
One last question in regards of the suggested modification in that mock-up. What are your thoughts about that? Because I think you tend in a slightly different direction, Benji.
Yeah, and again, I don't feel strongly about that. It was just a suggestion, but it would use less vertical space, which is sort of the goal here. If we hid the no blocks message and put the 3 blocks filtered, 0 blocks filtered on the same line as the region name and the buttons.
Oh.
I'm getting a thumbs up from Thomas on my suggestion, I assume. Other opinions?
I think information about filtered out or hidden blocks, it would be good to have that information in the place where user tries to see the blocks. So if the information is in a different place, then it's kind of might be a little bit confusing, probably not too much, but in a way, the information about something being hidden, it would make sense to have that information presented in the same place where the items would be. They wouldn't be hidden.
That's a good point. Thomas?
But how does this work in other modes of accessibility? When they're split into, at least visually looking at this, they're split into equal looking rows, and those rows are not very distinguishable to me. Like, it doesn't, I would not naturally think that the no blocks in this region, it doesn't look like a region to me. And I'm curious how that is for a screen reader or other forms of accessibility. It just ends up looking like a blur or very noisy to me. And what Benji's suggesting, you can tie the information, no blocks, you can say sidebar, no blocks in this region. That to me has direct linkage, whereas this feels fuzzier.
So you think just putting the message where it is in Ralph's current example, you think putting it there makes it less clear than putting it on the same line as sidebar?
Yeah, for me it does. I'm not seeing. So when I look at a list where all rows look equal, my first thought is not that it is the name of a region, then the blocks that go in a region, or a space that represents the blocks that go in that region. There's no divider visually to indicate that you've got these things. And if a screen reader is going through it, it may read it sidebar, place block, then no blocks in this region. And I'd have to hear how that works. And I'm not an expert in that, but I'm just curious if that works well when you're trying to communicate that the sidebar is empty, the content below is empty because it's been filtered. And there's a difference between the sidebar having no blocks ever and content below having 3 blocks, but you currently do not have access to them in the filter. And so just looking at this, to me, it doesn't work very well for me.
Okay. Does anyone know how this is going to be for a screen reader? Ralph, if you tried it out?
Not in detail, but I could do after the meeting and create a small screencast and post it on the channel.
Okay, thanks. So I'm not sure we have any consensus here. And as I said, I didn't feel strongly about it. So maybe we can just leave it as a suggestion. Go ahead, Ralph.
Just one idea, but I'm not sure from a technical standpoint if it's possible. But if you make the layout for sighted people that way, but if the announcement would be sidebar and then the automatic description like sidebar, no blocks in this region, and then place block, and content below, 3 blocks filtered in this region, and then place block and show filtered. That way, for screen reader users, it would work. Would be slightly a different order, but it would be automatically announced that way. But what you have, for example, in descriptions for fields. But I'm not sure if it's possible for, I'm also not sure what element it is. It is, anyway, I take a look after. Let's move on to the next issue, I think.
Yeah, so I
think,
guess,
go ahead. Sorry.
So to summarize this, the advantage of putting it all on one line, and I do like the idea of putting it before the place block button. The advantage of putting it on one line is that it makes the scrolling less of a problem. And the disadvantage, as Simo points out, is that people are looking for the blocks on a separate line, and that's perhaps the best place to put the message that they've been filtered out. So ready for the next point?
Yep, I stop.
Ralph, could you? Oh.
Sorry, I was too eager. What shall I do?
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Oh, okay.
Just a second. Here we go. So I was going to ask that you open this because I am sharing with ngrok and ddev share, so you could have opened this yourself. Yeah. I put the link in the Zoom chat, but yeah, here's the content page showing all the content on an Umami site by default, and as soon as you select one or more node, you get this little form at the bottom, which lets you select an action such as delete. Delete is still the first option on that list. We should have fixed that. We talked about that years ago. And then the submit button. And I think that a similar pattern, but maybe at the top of the screen, is my preference for dealing with the block layout rather than having all of those links going to the top. I think it'll be less clutter, and it might help with clearing the filter and then scrolling to the right place. So can we get some quick reactions as to whether you like that idea rather than the go to the filter link that Ralph was showing? I get a thumbs up from Simo and from Emma. I think it's probably more convenient a more convenient solution. It's less clutter, and it is consistent with what we have on the content page. So I feel pretty strongly that's a better solution. And the last point, do you agree that hidden is better than filtered? Thumbs up from Thomas and Simo and from Emma. Okay, so we have a lot of consensus, and I guess there's still some question about whether to put it on the same line or a separate line. That's and that I didn't feel strongly about that. Okay, so we're about halfway through the hour. There's another issue that was suggested. Scroll to the top. And this is issue 2519362. Redesign the menu link add form to be less overwhelming. And I did just share a few minutes ago in the Zoom chat a link to my test Drupal site. It is the Umami demo with the merge request for this issue applied. And maybe we'll start with this screenshot. So this is the add menu link form. And when this issue was first created, it was suggested that the title and the link and the parent are the most important elements of that. And I think I agree with that. And we should use the same pattern that we use on the node edit form to put the less important things in the sidebar. So here's a tab that where I loaded the menu link form before applying the merge request. So if I were to reload this page, it would look different. And that's pretty much what we saw in the screenshot. It might be slightly different, I'm not sure. Yeah, that looks like the 7 theme, and this is with Claro. And maybe I should go to admin structure menus and then say the footer menu and add link. That's the normal way to navigate to this. And this is what it looks like with the merge request applied. So you have the title and the link and the parent link. Those are the 3 that were identified as the important elements. And then off in the sidebar, you have the enable checkbox, the show is expanded text box, the description, and the weight. So first, do you understand the issue? Any questions about what it's about and the proposed solution? Thomas is already giving a thumbs up, not asking a question. Any disagreements about which are the important elements and which should be put off in the sidebar? Go ahead, Ralph.
I have only one slight worry. For example, you have in the sidebar the enabled checkbox, and through the proximity with the description field, if you don't actually read the description for enabled, then you think, at least my association was always, is the description enabled or not enabled? And that way it feels a bit distracting. And in the issue summary, also the planned resolution is also to have first the enabled checkbox, and then the show is expanded, and then the description, and then the weight. That way, that confusion might be tackled. But on the other hand, if you compare it, for example, to a content node, there you have the published checkbox, which is basically also on the left in the main content area, and it's more or less similar, published and enabled function-wise. So maybe it might be an idea to move enabled over. And on a side note, if you could quickly narrow down the viewport width.
Okay, I'm looking at a node form, and I guess Umami has content moderation enabled, and that's why we don't see the published checkbox.
Okay.
Instead, we have the content moderation drop-down list. And then going back to this, you wanted me to
narrow down
the window.
to make it mobile first.
Like so?
Yeah, and if you scroll down now, you have first the main content, then the save button, and then the sidebar. And ideally, the save button should be at the end, from my perspective.
Oh, what happens on the node form when we do that? Okay, the node form works that way. That's an excellent point. Thank you.
And also, if you go the other way around, it's a bit difficult on a video call, but if you're on a widescreen, on, for example, past 30 inches, then the sidebar is right aligned to the screen, and the main content area is more or less slightly centered to the remaining space, slightly to the left. That way you have quite the large jump between the main area and the sidebar. So in case you want to jump in between menu link title and description or whatever else, it's also challenging visually.
Okay, I think that I can just reduce the font size and simulate that, right?
Yeah.
So here we have this huge gap between them on a very wide screen or very small font. And what happens on the node edit form? Same thing. So I would consider that a valid point for a follow-up issue.
Yeah.
Anything else, Ralph?
Only one other slight minor detail is the question, why is the weight value available in the sidebar? For example, if you go to the menu link list page for the menu, no, to the overview, to the list of menu items for example, the footer menu.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Oh, sorry.
The footer menu has just one item in it.
Okay, because basically at the moment, everything is set to the track handles, and show row weights is hidden. So basically, if someone who has hidden the row weights comes to the menu item, you have no basically context. Setting the weight is more or less unnecessary. So I'm not sure if it's potentially confusing. So
I'm going to call that out of scope.
Yeah.
It's a separate issue. You can show the row weights on this form. By default, of course, they're hidden. But here, the existing form has a weight. And frankly, I don't know how else you would manage it. So I'm going to call that out of scope. Anything else, Ralph?
No, Thomas, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, Thomas.
I don't know how pertinent this is, but if you could look at the the merge requested, so the updated version of this add menu link page. The way I tend to think of things that are pushed off to the side is not that they are always used less frequently, but it is metadata about the primary thing that you're working on. And I'm not sure I love the description field, which is something that can typically be pretty long, being off in that area. And personally, I would, if I were going to put the parent link over there, it would make more sense as metadata about the menu link title, link, and description. And that's, but I understand what the intent of this issue is. So I guess in my perfect world, I would move description under parent link and leave everything else the same. But I'm not fond of putting description off into the right, because at that point, then it just almost begs the question, why have a description if it's being treated as not only optional, but it's not being given a lot of space to be written.
Funny, if we take Ralph's suggestion that enabled should be in the main region and your suggestion that the description be in the main region, then we're only moving 2 elements to the sidebar.
Right. And honestly, I would have swapped parent link to the top, then I would have had enabled, show enabled, and wait with description under menu link title and link. Because both parent link and description are optional, but parent link describes a relationship, whereas description is actual text. And that's why I would have organized it that way. But I'm fine, like I would definitely leave enabled and show as expanded in the right. There are metadata about the object, but description's not really metadata to me. That's actually part and parcel to the object.
Okay, so I think your main point is that you consider the organization of the form should be based on data and metadata rather than frequently used and less frequently used.
More or less, but I think that the frequently used needs to be at the top the way it is, et cetera, et cetera. And again, parent link is only used frequently if you've got a hierarchical menu. So there's going to be sites where parent link is as infrequently used as anything else. Link and menu link title are absolutely required. And so those belong where they are in that order. So that's my thinking.
So if we were to put the parent link at the top of the sidebar, it would still be readily accessible, and it would be, considered the most important part of the metadata, most frequently used of the metadata.
Correct. And it would make the best use of the way the screen is laid out.
Another point, let me remind you, let me edit rather than no, I guess this link is not. This link is provided by the contact module, so I don't have the same options. I can't put a description on it, which is what I wanted to do. Let me just for kicks add a child menu since that was fixed recently. Test link text. Add. And let me put test description and save that. And the only point I want to make is where the description shows up. Does that show up in the Zoom window?
No.
It's hover text, so I see it pretty clearly, but I guess it doesn't show up. It's the title attribute, which I guess I could see in the browser window. Here's the title attribute is test description. And I believe that title attributes on links are generally discouraged for accessibility reasons. Am I remembering correctly? Oh, and I see that Emma had to drop.
I know they are on images. I don't remember about links, but I think if you're using a link with an image, you definitely shouldn't. But I think like for links, that I don't remember there being a strong like objection to using them.
Okay, I got a thumbs up from Simo, so I think that means he agrees with me. But anyway, if it is discouraged, then all the more reason to put it off to the side. Any other comments on this? So in my initial look at it, I also thought that the two checkboxes should go together. I didn't especially think that the enabled looked like it was connected with description, but I just think it makes more sense to group the checkboxes rather than have checkbox text field, checkbox number field. I also want to put out one inconsistency with the existing node form, is that other than the log message, which is kind of prominent, every other thing is put inside a details element. And maybe we don't have to do that for the menu link. Some of these are rather large when they're fully expanded. That one's not so bad. The authoring information has 3 subfields. And then there are 2 checkboxes in this details element. So we don't have to be consistent, but it's worth at least considering that maybe since they're less important, they should be hidden in details elements. And that would certainly make it more consistent with the node edit form. Perhaps if we rearrange things as Thomas suggested, and the parent link was put at the top, we could not put that in a details element because it's the most commonly used. But the other things we might group in details elements. So Thomas, you've been patient. Go ahead.
I agree 100% with everything you just said. I like it because something that's missing for me from the metadata is I like context around metadata, and having those detail elements allow you to group, for example, the checkboxes. And more importantly, if descriptions are discouraged, and this is an assumption based upon what's been discussed thus far, then we really shouldn't make it so prominent that people think they should put in a description, because I know as a self-taught user of Drupal, I don't necessarily know what the best practice is when to use things, and a detail element hiding it would mean that I'd be a lot less prone to using it at all, and it would be available for people who want it for their site design, but it would hide it from everyone else who really shouldn't be using it if it is frowned upon. And I understand that at least in the instance of images, as Aaron mentioned, it is frowned upon. So maybe this is something that's a gray area where opinions aren't strong. But if in general usage, descriptions not adding a lot of value, retaining it for those who use it, but making it less visible would make the page less busy and easier to focus on things like the parent link, menu link, and link, a menu link, title, and link.
Okay. Yeah, you make a good point about the clutter, and that's with this rather long description text or help text. Imagine hiding that inside a details element. It would really dramatically decrease the clutter, the visual clutter on the page. Go ahead, Ralph. Ralph,
Might be also a good, yeah, noted. Thank you. It might be also a good recommendation maybe to create a follow-up for revising the microcopy, or for example, the descriptions in particular. some are a bit lengthy and some a bit unclear. So move that to a follow-up might be also an idea.
Yeah, I agree that that would be a good idea, and it should be a follow-up. Okay, so we have less than 10 minutes left. Let's see whether we have consensus on the recommendations. So I guess the biggest suggested change is Thomas's idea that the organizing principle should be data and metadata rather than frequently used and less frequently used. And let's just have a quick look at the node form again. Sorry. Title, media field, body, language, tags in the main column, as opposed to provision log message, menu settings, URL alias, authoring information, and promotion options. I think that data versus metadata is a pretty good way of describing that distinction. Should we make the same breakdown on this page? Thumbs up from Simo. Thomas, I assume you agree. Ralph agrees. I don't feel strongly, and Aaron doesn't give an opinion. Okay, so I think we can go with that. And then given that we're going to do that, I guess we'll be swapping the enabled checkbox and the parent link. Is that sort of the concrete version of that suggestion? No one's giving any opinions.
Yeah, I'm mostly happy with the way things are, and even the metadata definition. I do prefer the metadata data dichotomy. I don't know that enabled necessarily counts as data. So I just think the page would be pretty empty if you put everything over to the right. But I really want to make certain that I would most highly prize the details element change that you suggested. Like for me, that would make this the most usable. Hiding the busy text under weight and show expanded alone, or being able to have more information about description, that's even more important than my original suggestion.
Okay, but let's nail down the recommendation. So I actually I think I agree that the enabled checkbox and the show as expanded checkbox are good candidates to put together in a details element. And the only argument for putting enabled in the main area is that it would have some consistency with the node edit form. So I guess then the recommendation is just to put the parent link at the top of the sidebar expanded. And then put the enabled checkbox and the show as expanded checkbox in a details element. And then description and weight each would get their own details element. So Thomas agrees with that. Anyone else?
Just one question. In which details element would parent link go, or should it remain on the main page, on the main side?
The suggestion is that counts as metadata, very similar to the weight actually, and therefore should be in the sidebar.
Okay.
But since it's the most frequently used, we put it at the top of the sidebar and not inside a details element. Thomas agrees with that, and Simo had a thumbs up earlier. And then, as Ralph pointed out, the save and delete buttons should be at the bottom of the form when the screen is narrow. And we should have a follow-up issue that on very wide screens, these two regions become very far apart. But that's already a problem with the node edit form, so it's not in scope for this issue. Oh, I've failed to pay attention to the chat. Aaron apologizes for being very unopinionated during this meeting. Yes, we hope that's not a sign of sickness, Aaron. And Ralph says, if enabled is paired with show as expanded, it is also fine with you. Okay, so you at least don't object to putting these two checkboxes in a details element. And I guess a couple of reasons for putting the weight in a details element. One, to decrease clutter, especially with that long description. Second, because it's a really awkward way to manage it. People will almost always use the click and drag interface, at least on simple sites. Where are we? How do we get back to? Let's look at one that has a lot of elements and is hierarchical. People are most likely to use this page to rearrange things rather than use the edit form for any particular item to set the weight. It's possible, but it's much less convenient. And we're just at time. I think that covers everything. Am I forgetting something? Okay, then. Well, thanks all for the discussion. I think we have a lot of good recommendations on both of these issues. I will try to update this issue on menu link, and I assume Ralph, you'll post a comment to the filtering block layout, or would you like me to?
I can do that.
Great, thank you. Good, and I'll be back next week. Hope you all can make it.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Yeah, nice weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Benji.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Benji.